Hi, this is Reinhard from Everyday Systems. As you may remember from my audio didact podcast episodes way back when, I am a big fan of audiobooks. And for a while now, I've been hoping to record the No S diet book as an audiobook. Audible.com actually has a service that, from what I understand, makes it relatively straightforward for people to record and upload audiobooks for sale there. But I've been worried that my usual low production values for podcasting, essentially speaking directly into my iPhone and doing zero editing, just won't cut it for an audiobook. And upgrading my setup here is not really an option. I've got to do this on a shoestring, both in terms of time and money, or not at all. But people have repeatedly expressed interest, and in the Facebook group recently, I promised I'd record a sample chapter and let you guys decide how far off this is from audiobook quality. So, today's podcast, rather longer than usual, is Chapter 1 of the No S Diet. Please let me know what you think of it, and don't hold back. If it's close, but could just use a few edits, that would be great. But if I'm realistically going to have to invest hundreds of dollars or more in equipment or studio time, that would be good to know up front too. Please tell me on the bulletin board, on Facebook, or email me directly at reinhard.engels@gmail.com. Hope you enjoy it. Many thanks in advance. Chapter 1. It's that simple. The secret formula. Excess is the issue. 3 S's for 3 excesses. 1 exception. Moderation is the solution. The progress trap. Normalcy codified. What about nutrition? Why you should listen to me. Testimonials. What the rest of this book is for. The secret formula. Make everything as simple as possible, but not simpler. Albert Einstein. Is there really room for anything new under the sun as far as diets are concerned? Hasn't every possible gimmick already been tried several times without making the slightest dent in the relentless advance of obesity rates? There's one thing left. Simplicity. The No S diet is a diet plan so short and simple that it fits on the cover of this book. No pseudoscience, no miracle foods, no counting calories or carbs or fat or points, no disgusting recipes or draconian meal plans, just plain old common sense, charmingly and mnemonically codified. In brevity, a mantra, a haiku, a spell, but down to earth as a Kansas wheat field. There are 3 rules and 1 exception. No snacks, no sweets, no seconds, except on days that start with S. And that's really all there is to it. I'm not joking. You could put this book down, walk away, and start losing weight now, just by remembering those dozen-odd words. You've got the secret formula already. So why keep reading? Well, for one thing, you probably aren't quite convinced yet. Maybe you're amused, maybe you're intrigued, but you don't really believe that a huge, potentially crippling problem like being overweight or obese could be solved by a cutesy jingle. It can, by this cutesy jingle at least. And if you keep reading, I hope I'll convince you of that. Excess is the issue. People have gotten horribly fat over the last 20 to 30 years here in America and around the world. You've heard all the shocking statistics before. See the box on the next page if you want a refresher. They get worse every year. Why has this happened? You can follow the chain of causality endlessly. It gets infinitely complex if you pursue it far enough. But if your primary interest is in fixing the problem for yourself, the issue is actually quite simple. Box. From 1976 to 2004, the prevalence of obesity in the United States more than doubled, from 15% to 32% of the adult population. The majority of Americans, 66%, are now at least overweight, and despite the exponential growth of the diet and wellness industry, the problem is only getting worse. According to Dr. John Forrest, director of the Nutrition Research Clinic at Houston's Baylor College, if these rates continue, we'll all be overweight by the year 2035 and obese by 2100. Every diet book these days starts out with some sort of conspiracy theory about why people have gotten so fat. These stories generally involve evil corporations pumping us full of calories without our knowledge, the nefarious effects of mysterious stab-in-the-back substances such as refined carbohydrates, high fructose corn syrup, and trans fats, and the foolish and self-serving advice of the last generation of diet gurus. The reader is worked up into a state of righteous indignation. It's not my fault that I'm fat. Someone or something did this to me. It's flattering, it's comforting, but as far as your efforts to get thin are concerned, it's dangerously wrong. The truth is embarrassingly simpler. And well, just plain embarrassing. We're fat because we eat too much and move too little. We don't need any sneaky killer ingredients to account for our prodigious girth. Given the sheer, simple, overwhelming level of caloric intake that we as a society have become accustomed to, and the paltry amount of exercise we get, it would be a miracle if we weren't fat. According to a 2005 report issued by the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Economic Research Service, ERS, Americans eat 16% more calories than they did in 1970. And it's not as if they're making up for those extra calories by exercising more. In fact, according to Stephen N. Blair, director of research at the Cooper Institute in Dallas, Americans burn 300 to 700 fewer calories per day than in generations past, a number that matches or even exceeds our increased food consumption. Those extra calories have to go somewhere. They can't violate the first law of thermodynamics, which states that energy can never simply disappear. They are more than sufficient to account for us being as fat as we are. There's no mystery going on here. The problem is excess, pure and simple. Corn syrup versus cane sugar, carbs versus fat, white rice versus brown rice. These are details, exciting but ultimately insignificant distractions from the giant heart of the issue, the behavior of excessive eating, or what we used to call, before we were so given to it, gluttony. Sure, some of these ingredients are suboptimal, but even if we replaced them with their more healthful equivalents, we would still be consuming way too many calories, and burning too few to maintain anything close to a normal weight. The issue is not ingredients. It's not a matter of replacing X with Y. It's a matter of reducing both X and Y. 3 S's for 3 excesses. No snacks, no sweets, no seconds. These restrictions aren't arbitrary. I didn't pick them just because they happen to start with the letter S, though it's certainly convenient that they do. They target the 3 biggest, most egregious forms of dietary excess. By cutting out these indulgences during the week, you cut out plenty, but nothing you can't comfortably do without. It's efficient, but still humane. The S's are easy to identify and difficult to sneak around. By eliminating snacks and seconds, you restore the obviousness of excess. Confined to a single plate at mealtime, a lot of food will look like a lot of food. And you don't have to do a biochemical analysis of a candy bar to know that it's sweet. You can taste it. With your senses on your side, self-deception becomes very difficult, and without self-deception, few of us would gorge ourselves the way we do. By following these rules, you get a good enough idea of how much you're eating without having to pay an exorbitant and unsustainable amount of attention. Box. The ERS Food Consumption Per Capita Data Series, one of the few series tracking long-term consumption, suggests that Americans are eating more food every year. The total amount of food available for each person to eat increased 16% from 1,675 pounds in 1970 to 1,950 pounds in 2003. This increase was not isolated to a few food groups. Fruits and vegetables also showed an increase. No snacks. No snacks means no eating between meals. Until very recently, this would have been a no-brainer. But now everyone seems to be convinced that snacking is good for you. And it does seem to be the case that under laboratory conditions, people who eat a controlled amount of calories over the course of many small meals metabolize them slightly more efficiently than people who eat the same amount of calories in the traditional 3. But in real-world conditions, people who snack wind up eating a lot more food. So despite a perhaps slightly faster metabolism, they chunk up. The No-S diet isn't a lab diet, biology divorced from psychology. It's a real-world diet, built to withstand the pressures of your stubborn, sneaky mind. Do snackers really eat more? Astonishingly more. According to data from the continuing surveys of food intake by individuals, conducted by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, USDA, over 90% of our increased calorie consumption since 1977 has come from increased between-meal eating. If this statistic is accurate, snacking is not only the biggest problem in terms of dietary excess, but is almost the entire problem. If you think about it, it makes sense that snackers eat more. The trouble with eating frequently throughout the day is that it's impossible to get a sense of how much you are consuming without paying an exorbitant amount of attention, such as counting calories or points. Doing all that math is way too much conscious overhead to sustain for the long term, and it's not something you can automate into unconscious habit. You stop paying attention because it's too much work, and when you stop paying attention, you eat too much without even realizing it. Box. The less often you eat, the fewer calories you consume. David Levitsky, Ph.D., Professor of Nutritional Sciences at Cornell University. No sweets. No sweets is the only rule that targets a specific substance. Well, most diets do. But there is a critical difference from the usual dietary substance prohibitions. Because you are allowed to eat sweets on weekends and holidays, the S days, this rule is not so much a prohibition as a recasting of sweets from the routine staple they have become to their traditional role as desserts, something deserved, a treat, an incentive, a reward. It's really more about behavior than substance, about turning the weakness of a sweet tooth into a motivating strength. Viewed this way, the No-S diet is really profoundly pro-sweet. Deserved desserts really do taste much better. On S days, you can enjoy sweets without guilt, without also hating them for what they are doing to your body. You can plan and anticipate something much better than what you'd get by opportunistically raiding the fridge. Temptation becomes incentive. Note that the rule is no sweets, not no sugar. Sweets are defined as something whose principal source of calories is added sugar, whether refined or natural. Cookies, Pop-Tarts, cola, candy bars, and so on. You don't have to go crazy checking lists of ingredients and driving waiters crazy. Your taste buds will let you know. If you have to wonder, for example, yogurt or peanut butter, it's probably okay. By targeting just the really egregious offenders, you'll be cutting out a significant amount of calories. And when you avoid making yourself crazy over borderline foods, you'll be that much more likely to stick with the plan. The clear-cut cases are 80% of the problem and 0% of the headache. Do we eat enough sugar that avoiding sweets during the week will make a decisive difference? Sadly, yes, more than enough. We eat more than 10 times as much added sugar as our 19th century ancestors did. That's a lot of sugar calories and a lot of room for improvement. So much room that we could still enjoy plenty of sugar, say nearly 5 times as much as our ancestors, and still lose weight. Given the magnitude of excess in our current level of sugar consumption, there is no reason to resort to sweeping deprivations denying ourselves carbs in general, or even all sugar. No sweets during the week is enough, and it's sustainable. No seconds. No seconds means that at each meal you limit yourself to eating the food that is on one physical plate. Fill it up once and then no refills. Yes, you can fit a lot onto a plate, but you can't do it without seeing that it's a lot. That gentle pressure on your eyeballs is surprisingly effective. In the beginning, some whopping plates are to be expected. That's okay. The important thing is to build the habit and eat enough to see you through to your next meal without snacking. In time, you'll get very good at budgeting just how much it takes to do this without hunger or excess. If it costs you a few extra calories in the form of big firsts up front to buy the habit of structured mealtime eating, they're calories well spent. Do people who stick with single-plate meals really eat less than people who go back for seconds or thirds? According to an experiment conducted by Brian Wansink at the Cornell University Food and Brand Lab, single-platers ate an average of 14% less per meal, despite the fact that they took much bigger initial portions. One exception. Each of these rules on its own would probably help you lose weight. And taken together, they ensure that you won't compensate for eating less in one area by eating more in another. But losing weight is only one part of the issue. Keeping the weight off is just as important and usually far more difficult. Moderate as the rules just described are, you probably couldn't adhere to them 7 days a week, 365 days a year, without feeling deprived and resentful. That's where the critical no-S diet exception comes in. It works like this. On days that start with the letter S, you are free to eat whatever you like. Snacks, sweets, seconds, you name it. The training wheels come off. There are two kinds of S days. Days of the week that actually start with the letter S, Saturday and Sunday, and special days. Special days include your national and your religious holidays, the birthdays of your close family and friends. You probably wouldn't have dieted on the special days anyway, but with no S, you don't have to feel guilty about it. S days are a necessary safety valve, an incentive, and a reward. They aren't binge days. Binging comes from resentment, and who resents reward? And your weekday habits will start to carry over to the weekends. Less will seem like more, and gradually, without any conscious intervention, you'll eat less. These three rules and one exception may be simple, but they're sharp. They target the right problem, excess, with the right solution, moderation. Box. I'll be talking a lot about days that start with S in this book, and since that's a bit of a mouthful, I'll usually refer to them as S days. I'll refer to days that do not start with S, even more of a mouthful, as N days, i.e. non-S days. You can also think of N days as standing for normal days. Moderation is the solution. Given that the problem is excess, you would think that it would be obvious that the solution is moderation. But somehow all the other diet plans seem to have missed this connection. They try to cope with the issue of excessive eating by proposing another equal and opposite excess, either an excess of attention, counting stuff, or an excess of deprivation, restricting whole categories of foods. They try to solve one problem by introducing another. I call the excess of attention diets substance accounting diets, and the excess of deprivation diets forbidden foods diets. I'll consider each in turn because I think the virtues of the no-S diet become obvious in comparison. Substance accounting diets are plans in which you count calories, carbs, fat, points, whatever, some quantifiable substance. The appeal of these diets is that you can eat whatever you want as long as you balance the books at some point. You can eat a lot now as long as you make up for it later. It's like an accountant's ledger. These diets tend to fail because balancing the books is too much work. It requires you to pay an exorbitant and unsustainable amount of attention. It's not something you can automate into unconscious habit. Eventually, some stress or distraction is going to come along, and you're just not going to be able to spare the mental energy that tracking every bite requires. It's also not fun. I use the word accounting instead of counting, not just because it's job-like in the amount of time it takes, but because I want to emphasize that this is profoundly boring, much like being a financial accountant. No offense to any accountants out there, but I assume that you wouldn't be in that line of work unless you were getting well paid. The forbidden foods diets have this Manichaean, dualist view of the world. There are good foods and evil foods. Carbs and fat are the two biggies, alternating roles depending on the system. You can eat as much as you want of the good foods as long as you don't go anywhere near the evil foods. The appeal is you can go on being a glutton as long as you confine your gluttony to the good foods. All you have to do is focus your excessive eating. The downside is you really start to miss the evil foods. And because you're basically still a glutton, you haven't learned to moderate your appetites just to redirect them. You're not especially good at resisting what you want, and eventually you break down. According to some diet authorities, the reason forbidden foods diets initially seem to work is simply because people get sick and tired of eating the same old thing all the time, and so they start eating less. And these diets really do work for a while. People starting on these diets often do eat less and lose weight, but not for the reason they think, and not for long. Because it's not that the good foods really are any better. It's just that the simple boredom and disgust of being on such a monotonous diet makes people eat less. And of course, boredom and disgust are also the reason most people eventually give up. So the reason these diets initially work is also the reason they ultimately fail. Their strength is their weakness. In recognition of this underlying flawed mechanism, it might be more accurate to call these plans disgusting food diets. The advantages of the no-S diet over forbidden foods and substance accounting diets are pretty obvious, I think. There are no sweeping categorical restrictions, as with the forbidden food diets. You can eat anything you want at the appropriate time. It's basically, on one level, a shortcut to caloric restriction, a way of getting a sense of how much you're eating without the tedium of having to keep an exact count. You can get a good enough approximation of the amount you're eating without getting bogged down in all that substance accounting detail. With substance accounting diets, just finding the excess is most of the work. On the no-S diet, finding excess is no work at all. It jumps right out at you. When you limit your caloric input opportunities to 3 single-plate meals a day, it's obvious when you're eating too much. You don't have to count, you can see it. And because you haven't wasted most of your energy just looking for excess, you're in a much better condition to confront it. The progress trap. Pretty much any diet will lose you weight if you stick with it. The problem is, you won't. According to the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FDA, 95% of dieters fail to stick with their diets for more than a few months. And is it any wonder? Popular diets are heavily optimized for rapid progress. They may be effective in an abstract biochemical sense, but they don't take human psychology and motivation into account, and are therefore extremely difficult and unpleasant to be on for any length of time. Even if you could lose 9 pounds of belly fat in 11 days, as a ubiquitous internet ad promises, what would you do afterward? If maintenance gets any attention at all from these plans, it's as an afterthought, a phase 2 tucked away in the back of the book that hardly anyone ever gets to. But maintenance is more important than progress. Progress is intrinsically temporary. Maintenance is what you'll be doing the rest of your life. The no-S diet gives maintenance its proper focus. It does this by treating weight control as a mental problem, not a physical one. It focuses on incentives and enforceability, on leveraging limited reserves of willpower to build sustainable habits. The simple, natural, unobtrusive behaviors it prescribes soon become automatic. Unlike most diets, which get more and more insufferable as the gimmick ages, the No-S diet gets progressively easier. Instead of fighting against bad eating habits or pretending they don't exist, you develop good eating habits, which soon start to carry you along. Ask yourself if you can imagine staying on a particular diet for the rest of your life. If not, don't bother starting. It's a waste of time and will. Even, especially, successful dieters from other systems will find the No-S diet attractive. What next isn't a hypothetical question for them, and chances are more of the same is not an appealing answer. Successful dieters are in a better position to see the deficiencies of their diets because they succeeded. An unsuccessful dieter might think, if only I'd tried harder. It's difficult for someone who hasn't made progress to appreciate how much harder and more important maintenance is. It's impossible not to appreciate for someone who has. A big reason the No-S diet is so sustainable is that it is actually enjoyable. It isn't just less awful than other diets, a slightly more bearable grind toward a distant goal. It will actually make you enjoy food more. On the No-S diet, no pleasure is denied, just delayed and contained. Served up on the platter of limited opportunity, each pleasure becomes even more pleasurable than it was before. Maybe you wouldn't do it solely for pleasure, but you can do it also for pleasure. And when the goal is distant and doubtful or boring because already, temporarily, attained, that makes all the difference. Forbidden food diets like low-carb or low-fat fail miserably in this regard. At the outset, it might seem worth it to trade pasta for unlimited steaks or vice versa, but it gets old fast. Diet programs like Weight Watchers that require you to be a full-time calorie or carb or fat or point accountant are time-consuming and joyless. Besides the sheer tedium of compliance, if you come to think of food as fuel, a mere quantity, you'll come to loathe it and your number-crunching, munching self. Long-term weight management has not only been an unsolved problem, but a largely unconsidered one. Being overweight tends to be seen as some kind of temporary emergency requiring drastic intervention, a manifestly ridiculous view, but apparently good enough to sustain a multi-billion-dollar industry. A few marketing departments have taken to peppering their quick fix promises with talk of lifestyles and ways of eating, but that's rare and superficial, doublespeak to counter obvious objections rather than real solutions. Almost no one has seriously considered how to recast a temporary emergency into its opposite, sustainable normalcy. Normalcy codified. The No-S diet is simple and specific. Commercial diets are too complicated for people with outside interests to follow. Eating equals math. Conventional wisdom rules about diet are too simplistic and vague to be useful. Eat only when you're hungry. The No-S diet finds the happy medium between the two, the right level of abstraction. You have just enough direction to do your job, but not so much that you resent its imposition. You have a solid framework, but the details are up to you. You have sufficient guidance and sufficient freedom. It's a system without too much system. I'm not going to lie to you. The No-S diet is a diet, a bunch of rules about how you should eat. But the idea is that the rules are simple and intuitive and natural enough that they'll eventually become habit, second nature. They'll start out rational and become routine. A member of the No-S Diet Bulletin Board put it beautifully. A month in, I don't think I'm on a diet anymore. I'm just eating normally. But it's a different normally than a month ago. There's nothing left to stick to. Eating because I'm bored is unsatisfying now. Going for seconds leaves me feeling uncomfortably full, and sweets that aren't treats are nowhere near as satisfying as they used to be. When you are trying to form a new habit, to make something second nature, it helps if it jives with your first nature. It will be easier to learn and have fewer unintended side effects. When I explain the no-S diet to naturally thin people, they often have trouble understanding what the big deal is. But that's what I do already, more or less, they tell me. I'm not offended. On the contrary, I take this as the highest compliment, as evidence that the no-S diet is just the explicit formulation of something natural and widespread, or at least formerly natural and widespread. The no-S diet is a lot like the way naturally thin people across societies and times and cultures have always eaten. The details vary a little from place to place, and it's never been formulated exactly like the no-S diet, but a limited number of limited-sized meals with sweets and big feasts reserved for special occasions is a pretty universal way of eating. And remember, being thin is not some anomalous condition found only among Okinawans and French women and Paleolithic cavemen. Most people in most places at most times in history were thin, even here in the United States, until very recently, around 1980. So you don't need to look for some crazy far-out solution. Just eat like they did. It's safe, it's a known quantity, we know how to do it, it clearly works, and doing something this normal is going to be easier than doing something strange and historically unprecedented. The behavior of thousands of generations of your ancestors has carved deep grooves for these habits to fall into. The year 1980 is obviously an arbitrary cutoff, but you get the point. It's close, it's not strange. Many of you reading this book can, or should be able to, remember 1980. Nor do you have to replicate the 1980 diet in every extraneous detail. No S is all the time machine you need. People talk about the French paradox, the idea that the French can eat fatty, carby, delicious food and still stay skinny, while health-conscious, calorie-counting Americans are the fattest people on earth. It seems not only improbable, but unjust. The French love their food and stay skinny. We hate our food and get fat. Sometimes red wine or olive oil or some other miracle ingredient is held to account for this. But the thing is, this phenomenon is not so particularly French. As I mentioned before, look to any country in which meals and meal times are still largely governed by tradition, and you'll find the same thing. People make their food choices based on custom and taste instead of health, and somehow stay thin. Japan is often held up as another example of this. And the Japanese also have miracle foods. But their miracle foods are completely different from the French miracle foods. And keep in mind that obesity in most places where American-style eating hasn't become entrenched are closer to those of France and Japan than to ours. What do all these countries have in common? Not miracle foods. We're the schmucks who believe in miracle foods. What they have in common are traditional structures around how and when people eat. The details may differ a little from country to country, but there is a surprising degree of overlap. Traditional eaters don't perma-snack. They eat discrete social meals. Treats and excesses exist, but they're reserved for special feast days. Fortunately, we haven't lost all of our traditional eating behaviors. Eating is still an inherently social activity. Even in modern times, we have customs that involve eating meals in groups with family and friends. We tend not to eat meals alone. So why is it that no other diet plan seems to consider this obvious and important fact? It's bad enough that you yourself have to eat the nasty fare these diets prescribe. There's no way you're going to succeed if you have to convince others to eat it too, or if you have to cook separate meals. The no-S diet dispenses with all that. You eat normal food just like the people you're eating with. You just eat less of it. They don't even have to know you're doing anything different. No more separate meals, no more awkward excuses at dinner parties, no more family members secretly or not so secretly hoping you'll get it over with and fail already so they can go back to eating normal food again. Who needs this extra stress? Dieting is hard enough without having to convince other people to go along with it. In the end, The no-S diet is really just the explicit formulation of the implicit traditional rules that used to govern our eating and still do in some places. Normalcy codified. It's not exactly the same, but it's close enough to resonate deeply and simple enough to be easily replicable. Box. In borrowing from a food culture, pay attention to how a culture eats, as well as to what it eats. In the case of the French paradox, it may not be the dietary nutrients that keep the French healthy, lots of saturated fat and alcohol, ? So much as the dietary habits, small portions, no seconds or snacking, communal meals, and the serious pleasure taken in eating. Worrying about diet can't possibly be good for you. Let culture be your guide, not science. Michael Pollan, author of The Omnivore's Dilemma. What about nutrition? The no-S diet is a framework for controlling excess. Beyond that, it makes no stipulations about your nutritional or gastronomic choices. That doesn't mean they're not important. They're just separate issues. Fight one enemy at a time, not three at once. That said, I find that having a limited number of limited quantity meals makes me take each one more seriously, both from a gastronomic and a nutritional point of view. Pretty much every meal I eat is delicious or healthy or both. Each plate is a spotlight. You can't help but think about taste and nutrition because you know you have only 3 meals a day and only one chance to do each meal right. You've raised the stakes, made each input opportunity important, something to be taken advantage of. You'll eat healthier, more delicious meals without further explicit, systematic intervention. It should also be mentioned that simple excess, and not the lack of any particular dietary substance, is the most pressing nutritional problem today. The single healthiest thing most of us could do today from a nutritional standpoint, by a long shot, would be simply to eat less. You have no business worrying about antioxidants when you're 50 pounds overweight. Why you should listen to me. I am neither a doctor, a nurse, a dietitian, a nutritionist, a personal trainer, nor any other kind of health professional. I am not an expert. This is a tremendous advantage. Diet is not a problem that requires specialized knowledge. It is a general problem with an obvious solution. If I were encumbered by any form of expertise, this obviousness wouldn't be nearly as striking. A doctor cannot convincingly say, duh. I am a librarian by training and a computer programmer by accident. A few years ago, I noticed I was getting a little too heavy, borderline obese, actually, if you want to get technical, and came up with this cute common sense formula. To give credit where credit is due, I think it was my wife who came up with the critical days that start with S exception. She claims not to remember this. I had no expectation that it would actually work, but within 2 months I'd lost 20 pounds. There was no pain and suffering. There were no unbearable pangs of hunger. I barely even noticed what I was doing. All I noticed was that I wasn't feeling disgusted and guilty from stuffing myself all the time anymore. I've since lost an additional 20 pounds, so my total progress has been from 210 to 170, or 40 pounds down from where I started, and 50 pounds down from my all-time high of 220. To be fair, that second drop may have had something to do with the fact that I also started doing some exercise. See page 173. This seems to be my natural healthy weight, 10 or 15 pounds below what I had imagined my ideal weight should be when I started. People now describe me as lean, which is sweet music to a lifelong husky. I've been on the diet since March 2002 with no yo-yoing. Unlike most diets that get more and more insufferable as the gimmick ages, the no-S diet gets progressively easier and becomes largely unconscious. It becomes almost like a religious dietary restriction, effortlessly inviolable. You don't see a whole subgenre of books geared at strictly observant Jews and Muslims on the theme of how to avoid stuffing your face with pork and shellfish. People I explained it to, responded enthusiastically, and so I decided to stick it on the web. I'm a computer programmer, so that seemed like a natural thing to do, and I've been astonished at the response. I thought the no-S diet would be interesting just as a personal record of what one guy did, but people took this idiosyncratic, personal, and admittedly kind of crazy-sounding system and applied it to their own problems, successfully. Even more successfully than I had in some cases, because they had more weight to lose. Testimonials. Hundreds of people took the risk of making a major life decision based on the advice of a guy with no relevant credentials, with no authority beyond that which comes from making sense. And it paid off. And these are just the hundreds that I know about. Not everyone who does the no-S diet sends me email or posts to the website's bulletin board, much as I wish they would. You readers of this book are much luckier than those bold early adopters. You don't have to rely on the no-S diet merely making sense. You also have the experience of this first generation of beta testers to guide you. In this section, I present a small sample of what people have to say about the diet. See the nosdiet.com bulletin board for many more. Because readers are presumably the most interested in blood and guts reminders, pounds lost are given in bold for each testimonial. It's not the only metric, it's not the best metric, see page 134, but it's the metric everyone seems to want to see. And if nothing else, it is evidence that significant weight can be lost on the no-S diet, which, given the obvious moderation and sustainability of this approach, is perhaps the more incredible part. At 96 pounds down, Josie from Washington is probably our reigning pound-for-pound champ. She writes, "I have been dieting and following this program seriously for 9 months. In that time, I have lost an incredible amount of weight and increased fitness in ways I have never dreamed possible. I started off at 289 pounds. I am now at 193 and still dropping. This plan really truly works. Be kind to yourself. Some days are just better than others. Do the best you can and stick with it. I cheat every weekend. I love red wines and dark beer. This diet allows me that choice. I truly believe my finding this diet has changed my life forever. No words can express my thanks. My doctor is going to be in shock when I go see him in October. What fun! Yippee!" Brian from Ireland writes, "I started this sometime last summer or fall, can't remember exactly. I lost 40 to 50 pounds and seem to be holding steady around 185 pounds for several months now, which is good for my height and I'm happy with it. I'm still doing no-S. It seems once I got to my ideal weight, I stopped losing more. Sensible, balanced eating. No way-out menus. I love it. I've never felt so content about my weight or my appetite." Deb from Long Island writes, "I eat what I enjoy, and I balance that with regular exercise. I would rather take longer to get slim than feel like I'm in a biochemical war with my food. I love it all. It's almost my first-year anniversary with no-S, and I've lost about 17 pounds. I will never, ever switch from this life plan. It is foolproof." Rich from Toronto, who has since lost over 30 pounds, writes, "A month in, I don't think I'm on a diet anymore. I'm just eating normally, but it's a different normally than a month ago. There's nothing left to stick to. Eating because I'm bored is unsatisfying now. Going for seconds leaves me feeling uncomfortably full, and sweets that aren't treats are nowhere near as satisfying as they used to be." James from Maine writes, "I've been doing no-S since last June. I don't know my exact starting weight, but my best guess is that I'm down about 40 or 50 pounds since then. I still have a long way to go, probably at least 75 more pounds, but after 8 months, I'm smaller than I've been in well over a decade. My belt has a half dozen new notches cut into it. I have more energy, and I don't get as tired. Perhaps more important, my relationship with food has been repaired. I now know what it is to enjoy food, both while I'm actually eating it and when the act of eating it lingers in my memory. No more binge guilt cycles. No more I shouldn't be eating this. I just follow the rules and enjoy the abundance of tasty, nutritious food in my life." Spiral Stairs from New York writes, "I started the no-S diet in the middle of June. Now, almost exactly 5 months later, I'm down 50 pounds. So it's been my experience that no S really works if you commit to it. Emma, from an undisclosed location, writes, I looked through my diary this morning and counted 10 weeks. No S. Smile. How time flies. I've lost 4.5 kilograms, 10 pounds. Prior to No S, I was a constant grazer with an insatiable sweet tooth, and despite regular exercise, I was gradually getting fatter. I felt depressed and guilty about the way I was eating. I reached the upper threshold of my healthy weight range, and I'd be officially overweight now if I hadn't found No S and this board. Kathleen from Brisbane, Australia, writes, I started in mid-2005. Over 18 months, I've lost 27 kilograms. That's 59.4 pounds. From 111 down to 84, 244.2 down to 184. Cool. My BMI, for what that's worth, has dropped from 35 to 26.5. I haven't been doing much exercise beyond walking to the train station. Silent but Deftly from Boston writes, Does it work? Yes. 12 pounds since November and still losing. Only about a pound a week, but they're not coming back. It can be the easiest thing in the world to do, but there are times when it's almost frustratingly difficult. I can tell you it's worth it. I've never before had anyone ask me if I'd lost weight without wanting a favor. People are starting to notice, and they're amazed when I tell them that I'm still eating what I used to eat, just less of it. Roomba from San Francisco writes, Yippee! I just reached the 20-pound weight loss mark. I checked on the member list to see how long it has been. I joined in June, so the loss is about 1 pound per week, or a teensy bit more. I think of all the diets, exercise programs, personal trainers, and general misery I went through over so many years with little result, and this simple, easy system works so well. Navin from Kentucky writes, I'm another example of the slow loser. I've been doing this over 2 years, and I've lost about 1 pound a month. While it doesn't sound like much, do the math and it adds up over time, as I'm down about 26 pounds. The fast loss of other diets is fool's gold. Sticking with it is the bane of any diet. I'm sure all of us know more people who have lost big and then gained it right back than who have lost weight and kept it off for any length of time. Unless you are morbidly obese, a slow, steady, maintainable loss is a good thing. Your body will thank you later. Catbird from Planet Texas writes, I've been no-essing for about 11 months now and just recently hit the 25-pound mark. Too cool. My husband reminded me the other day I should let you all in on my success. I'm still no-essing, still walking, and still losing. It doesn't get much better than this. Kevin from Maryland writes, Since June, I lost about 20 pounds, but most of that in the first 3 months. At this point, I'm closing in on my ideal weight, probably another 10 or so. Before I started resistance exercise, I actually weighed about 5 pounds less. I might not make it all the way down to my ideal weight, given that I eat whatever non-sweet one-plate meal I want 3 times a day. When you stop and think about it, by world standards, that's still a pretty generous amount of food. At 46, I'm 10 pounds over what I graduated college at, and I'm significantly stronger, although I know I couldn't run as fast as I could then. Do it. You'll love it. Not that mere popularity should sway you, but the website, which I proudly run out of my basement on a hobbyist budget, is now linked to by thousands of other websites and blogs and is consistently among the most popular entries on social bookmarking sites like Delicious and directories such as Yahoo, outplacing presumably much better funded commercial plans. As a phenomenon, it's become a little like the diet equivalent of that cold prevention drug Airborne, which proudly boasts that it was made by a teacher. For people tired of being let down by experts, the fact that the No-S diet was created by a librarian seems to have had a similar appeal. What the rest of this book is for. Convinced yet? I hope so. But perhaps you're still a little confused. That's what the rest of this book is for. Maybe you have questions about how precisely to interpret some of the rules. Is a snack defined as when you eat, or is it a particular kind of food? See page 36. Does fruit count as a sweet? See page 75. Is there any limit as to how many sweets, snacks, and seconds I can eat on days that start with S? See page 99. I've been astonished by the number of questions my simple, clear formula has elicited since I posted it to the web in March 2002. In chapters 2 through 5, you'll find answers to the most frequently asked questions, including the ones I just listed, organized logically by the rule or exception to which they pertain. Skim over the rules chapters in the middle of the book to clear up any compliance questions you may have, some of which may not have occurred to you yet, so do take a look, even if you can't think of any at the moment. Then I'd suggest carefully reading Chapter 6, Building the No-S Habit. The No-S rules are powerful and very habit-friendly, the carrot and stick you need to train your eating behaviors. But just as a trainer of wild animals wouldn't step into the ring without first knowing something about the animals in his or her charge, you should familiarize yourself with the nature of the habits you are about to train. Besides big-picture philosophical stuff, Chapter 6 also contains useful practical advice on setting milestones and recovering from failures, the nitty-gritty on whipping your habits into shape. This is a spare, minimalist diet, and I've tried to keep the book that way too. In Chapter 7, Beyond the No-S Diet, you'll read about all the peripheral issues and fluff I've tried to keep out of the rest of this book. You might be surprised at some of the issues I consider peripheral, like nutrition, and fluff, recipes. Beyond doesn't necessarily mean bad, and Chapter 7 also contains a discussion of how you might apply the principles behind the No-S diet to other self-improvement projects, like exercise, as well as a brief description of the free online resources at noesdiet.com.